This is Rhea, and this is Just the Who of Us, where we talk about a range of topics, including life events, current events, spirituality, entertainment, family relationships, as well as answering listener questions and more.
So welcome back. Welcome back to the States because you were gone for a while. I'm glad to have you back. I wanted to kind of introduce you in a different light because we actually will be seeing Taylor quite a bit as they will be here every month for the next year. And I'm so happy. I love our conversations. You bring a lot of education to the podcast, and I'm excited to have you here on a regular basis. Um,
Very excited too. I greatly appreciate the opportunity and also very much enjoy our conversations.
Thanks. Nice. So today we actually have a pretty not intense, but a pretty kind of deep conversation to have. It doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on, what side of the system you're on. I think we can all agree that this past year, especially, has been really intense politically. I mean, more than this past year, but social media wise, things have been intense this past year or so politically, and you know, it can be a lot. Um, I went through a period where I found myself on Facebook just like resharing all kinds of stuff. Like it was constantly on my feed. And so I was constantly resharing. I was on TikTok, resharing things, and when you run a business and when you are doing things that require marketing, people need to see your projects. They need to see kind of you showcasing your abilities and all these things. And I was doing nothing but sharing political posts. And I'm not really a political person. Like I have my beliefs, um, but I wasn't doing that before. And I found myself doing it now. And so I went through a period where not too long ago, I just like redid everything. I unfriended like 300 people. I, was tailoring my social media to be more kind of business focused, but at the same time, I wanted to get unlost and the overwhelming social media presence of political conversation. I feel like a lot of people have gone through that. It's like I said, no matter what side of the fence you're on, because I'm not a fan of the current president. Political party aside, I can look at both sides, both major parties, and say, yeah, I can understand that. I can understand why someone would be Republican. I can understand why they'd be conservative. I I can understand why someone would be Democrat. Um, understand why people are liberal or I understand and I can look at things and say, okay, I understand that. I understand why you would feel that way and not in any like judgmental, harsh way. Just I can understand it. However, there are just some things that I don't agree with. And when it comes to the way we treat people, it can't always be lollipops and rainbows. We have opinions, we have emotions, but when it comes to the way we treat people, I can't move my stance on how I think people should be treated. And it plays a big part into my political affiliation. Realistically, I don't really want to affiliate with either one of the major parties, but also being realistic, they're the two that get the votes. So there is other options, but realistically, if we want our vote to count, we have to pick one of the two, and that's just the reality of it, unfortunately. Because I've met third party candidates, loved them, but enough people don't vote for anything but Republican or Democrat, and so that's just the game, unfortunately. But personal feelings aside on, I can understand different things, but my stance is what it is. So, I was going through and just reposting, reposting, reposting. And so of course it consumed my social media timeline, right? Like everything I saw on social media was related to politics and never before. And so I just completely revamped everything. I started going through and putting not interested on things, selecting interested on things that I wanted to see, and just really like reconstructed my whole social media timeline altogether. Um, but it took a little time getting lost in that, getting lost in the politics before I realized like, oh, I'm doing the thing that I think is annoying when other people do. And then other people do it too, because you see it on the other side. People just posting and reposting and reposting all the time. So it can get it can be consuming and overwhelming and kind of take over your personality a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I resonate so much with everything you said. And I think, you know, really, like you mentioned, this past year has been very kind of leaning into the extremes and the polarization with politics more so in the past. But yeah, I resonate with so much with what you were saying. This year has really been feeding into and leaning into the extremes with the political polarization.
Yeah.
Um, and if you look at or talk to political experts, they kind of equate a lot of the things that we've been seeing with the modern political sphere to the civil rights movement, just particularly with like all of the political assassinations that have happened over the past year. And it's really scary to think about that that's what the current political climate is in the United States right now.
Yeah.
But then we also have social media, which just makes all of those extremes and that graphic content readily available to people.
Yes.
And that's not something that our brains are like wired to be consuming 24/7 in that manner. And then you have, social media algorithms that exploit that purposely feed into those extremes by, figuring out what you're interested in based on the content you engage with, and then both showing you the content that you're interested in aligns with your political beliefs and the extremes on the opposite side in order to rage bait you. So that way you're both at the same time being in echo chambers, leading you more and more into the extremes with things that are in your political interests, while also being getting lost in the comments section and arguing with strangers on the internet about things that are on the opposite end. And
Right.
that's just how the social media algorithms work, which result in keeping you on the platform longer and therefore feeding into those political extremes and resulting in even more polarization. There was a study a couple of years ago, I forget which university now, but they found that like 85% of political content on Twitter was generated by 6% of users.
Wow.
So 6% of users were generating 85% of the political content on Twitter. And this was just like a couple of years ago that they did this study.
Yeah.
So that just kind of puts it into perspective of like what you're seeing and what you're engaging with on social media is not the vast majority of the general population of what the
Right.
country believes in politics. It's again what's going to be most engaging, what's going to keep you on the app and be the most polarizing. And then it kind of just leads into this constant depressive doom scrolling and taking in all this content.
Yeah.
And the other thing is with graphic content too. Like that was a big thing with like a lot of people were like going out to like watch like the actual like full video of the Charlie Kirk assassination. It was like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not something that you should be going to seek out or wanting
Right.
to like watch that. That's like really graphic
Yeah.
and traumatizing.
Yeah.
Um and just the lack of accountability for both having content that's graphic that's readily available to people, including young people, also like kids that are able to just gain access to that, as well as just the algorithms being purposefully designed to exploit the already growing political divide and to make that worse and to feed into those extremes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. One of my teenagers showed, I think me and my husband and maybe one of their older siblings was like, "Oh, look, here's the video." And I was like, we shouldn't be able to see things like that. And it's crazy that people are putting it on, like putting it out there for the world to see. But at the same time, it's going to get reactions. So it's not really surprising that people do it. Uh, you know, uh, it's, I completely lost my train of thought there. Uh, yeah, like things like that shouldn't just be readily available. And it's not just young people whose brains are still developing, right? It's grown adults as well who kind of keep perpetuating these things. You recently wrote an article in Brains magazine, and the title is "Bridging the Divide: Lessons from Mental Health Advocacy to Overcome Political Polarization." And this article was perfect because it gives you this kind of step by step. Hey, first of all, let's talk about what this is a little bit. And then let's discuss how we can overcome this, how we can navigate it to overcome the kind of complex feelings and responses we want to give in response to this. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So over like the past year or so, particularly with again all of the extremes we've seen on both sides of the aisle with politics, I've been particularly interested in the effect that that's had on people's mental health, both personally as well as the effect that that's had kind of on the public health sphere and sector, because that's where my work and advocacy lies. So I've been doing research on that, and that was actually what I had presented at the seventh Global Mental Health Summit in South Africa. So that was kind of my abstract in my work. And I had also identified kind of key items that both individuals and organizations can take to try to kind of close that gap to overcome politics, specifically again, looking at it from the lens of from a mental health advocacy perspective, because that's been a major obstacle that we've encountered in the public health space, particularly, is kind of turning that into a partisan issue when it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Like during the COVID pandemic, it was like over 90% of Americans thought that there was a mental health crisis. Like, when's the last time that 90% of Americans agreed on everything, on anything? Like, you got 90% of people saying there's a mental health crisis. And like, it makes sense, all
Yeah.
the social isolation during COVID, like people on both sides of the aisle saw that. But then what actually happened as a result of that? Well, we got 988, which was great, but we're also struggling to keep funding for that. And that was the only thing we got, which hasn't really been as effective without any of the other things to actually support mental health care
Right.
and the underlying factors there. And so there's just turning something that should be a bipartisan issue, because again, 90% of people in America agree that this is a crisis that we need to work together to resolve. Why are we not working together to resolve it?
Right.
So kind of looking at it from that lens. And then the Brains article kind of took that research and the work that I've had from the advocacy perspective and identified some of those things, but not just things that organizations can do, but also individuals in their daily lives. Because really, if we're going to be able to move forward as a society to not be in this state of raging political ideologies that are clashing against each other, having political assassinations out in the street, like that's not the society that we want to live in.
Right.
We need to start overcoming these differences and acknowledging them, but being able and willing to move past them. So the article both talks about it in terms of, again, from that advocacy point and like specific actionable items that can be um, organizations, individuals can take, as well as things to just incorporate into your daily life to start having that individual shift and that cultural shift so that way we can progress as a society to be more willing to work with one another.
Nice. You know, one thing that you're saying here, not everyone who disagrees with you is an extremist, right? and, and that line stuck out to me because it's so true. My husband and I went to the shooting range a while back, and we are not part of the MAGA culture. And we go, and there's a father and his son sitting there, and they're training. Father's wearing a MAGA hat. My husband is African American, and the rest of us are Caucasian. And so, we're sitting there. He and I are sitting there. The father and son are sitting there. If you saw this scenario online, you would probably think, oh, like shit's about to go down. Someone's going to say something, like you would have this assumption. And we didn't have an assumption. We noticed the hat, but whatever. And somehow a conversation struck, and the father looks over at my husband and he's like, hey, do you want, like, I guess he noticed that we had like different types of guns, different sizes and things we were training with. And he's like, hey, do you want to shoot this? And my husband was like, yes. And it ended up like he went over, like we were all hanging out and talking. Guess what didn't come up once? Politics. And so it's like there's these situations that you think you see someone a lot of times who has a different opinion, and you're just like, oh, like they don't agree with what I agree with, they're the worst. Or, you make these assumptions. There are certain observations I make in certain people to whether I want to spend time around them or not. And it's typically not their political party. It's how are you treating people? Are you being ignorant towards people who aren't like you, whether they look different, whether they're in a different class, whatever the case may be? Those are the things I look for. I don't care who you voted for. I care how you treat people. And so, but when you're online sometimes and you see those different opinions, you automatically assume it's easy to do, you automatically assume, oh, they're racist, they're this, they're that. And not to say that it's never the case, but typically it's people just voicing their opinion just like you are. Now there are cases, I have met people who people I actually know in real life that I've unfriended on Facebook because I'm like, I don't want to know that about you. And this comment that you're making, it's really coming off this certain way. Now we can have a conversation about it. And I've had conversations with people that I know about things, that they put on Facebook. Um, they also know just because we're not friends on Facebook doesn't mean I hate you in real life. And that's something that I think is very important too, because we don't have to be friends on social media to not hate each other. Like I just might not want to see what you have to post because I know that you're not doing your research. And it's another, it's something else that you point out in this article is do your research. Don't feed into clickbait for one. Don't just repost things if you don't know its validity. It's one thing that I really respect about my husband is that he's not going to give me information or our children information or the world information unless he's verified it and learned about it. And he's taught me a little bit about that too. It's not something that I think we commonly often do, especially when it comes to things that kind of raise our blood pressure a little bit. It's that instant response like, oh, I don't agree with that. Or yeah, that must be true. That there's people that we have certain opinions about, and it's because of clips that we see on the internet. Um, I'm not a huge fan of someone else that was recently in the media, um, but I saw clips and I said, okay, you know what? Let me actually, before I continue to not like this person, let me go see if the things that they're saying are taken out of context or if it's in context, if it's valid. And it was valid. They were not a great person, but I had to figure that out. And I initially did the thing that people do. Oh, well, I saw this about him and I don't like him. But okay, if I'm going to have an opinion on someone, I need to actually know. Because, first of all, why am I wasting my energy and my anger and my frustration over something in the moment that I don't even know if it's really valid? I think it's a thing that people often do and often do currently. And not to say that it has never been like this to some extent, like people have always argued and bickered online, but there are certain things that have been so media driven that they're driven kind of for this point to get a response. And like you said, that response keeps people coming, it keeps people talking. And even though it's not positive, it's an action, like it's like a kid. I want attention. I'm going to do whatever. I don't care if it's good or bad. You're paying attention to me, and unfortunately, adults do that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we talk a lot about kind of misinformation, but when we talk about it, we don't stop to think about when we might be unintentionally perpetrating misinformation and
Absolutely. Absolutely.
spreading it without verifying if something is real or not, particularly on social media.
Yeah.
And like that's just been the case for a while because someone can post and say anything, doesn't mean if it's true, but it's even more so the case now with like how good like generative AI has gotten, like
Mhm.
scarily good over like the past year and like deep fakes and all of that. And it's like you have to really verify your sources of just anything you see online, like
Yeah.
to make sure that that's legit. I
Mhm.
mean, there's been multiple times that even like professional news publications have published something because they saw something and thought it was the case, and it turned out to be, not true, and they had to post a redaction and things. So it's like
Right. Yeah.
making sure that if you're spreading something as gospel, you want to make sure that that is actually true.
Right.
Otherwise, you are contributing to the problem and again feeding those extremes and spreading misinformation.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. You know, the funny thing about the internet is that we for social media specifically is that we forget that there are algorithms, there are target audiences, there are these things put in place to keep your interest, right? And a lot of times, those things put in place to keep your interest are not things that you would otherwise see on a regular basis. Um, there was a conversation with someone who, when it became this really big internet focus about trans rights and transgender, like whether transgender people should be allowed in what bathrooms. It was such a big thing on social media. People cared so much about it. And someone made the point to me that, like, do you know how many people I've run into, how many transgender people I've run into in public bathrooms? Zero. Like, it's not a thing that happens all the time. Like, who cares? But it's just one of those things that, like, the internet cares because social media cares, and social media cares because they want your involvement. So anything that's going to get any kind of back and forth, it doesn't, I think that social media should not be allowed to be a factor in who we vote for. And I say that because things get blown so big, so inflated. Um, when it came to the election between Trump and Kamala, I personally don't think that things like, and let me explain before you guys get upset, let me explain. I don't think that abortion rights should have been her focus, right? Because it took away from so many other important things that she stands for and that she, would have planned to have done. It took away from her professional career, her accomplishments. It took away from all these things, but it was such a media focused topic that it was like the perfect thing to run with. And I feel like if that would have been the case, she might have won. Um, you know, I think also one of the reasons it was such a big focus because it was kind of the opposite of what Trump was running for. The things that he had focused on was kind of like anti-abortion, and then you counter that with reproductive rights. And reproductive rights are not just abortion rights, but that kind of is what everybody thinks when you think of reproductive rights, especially if you don't know what reproductive rights consist of. So it became this, okay, do we support abortion or are we against it? And it split and really for the running of the country, I don't think that should have been the focus. Um, that's just my opinion. Now, I'm pro-choice. I do believe that people should have bodily autonomy. Uh, I've had an abortion. Uh, I don't think we should just do it willy-nilly. It shouldn't just be birth control. But I shouldn't be able to control what you should do with your body and vice versa. We can have conversations, we can have opinions, but I just don't feel like that should be everyone's right, you know? So I think that it was really the wrong thing to focus on, just my opinion, you know. But it was such a focus in the media that it was like, all right, cool. That's what we're gonna go with. So many other things should have been highlighted, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that point, and it was also kind of used with Trump's campaign against her, where it was like that was one of her central points and
Yes.
female candidate. And
Yeah.
so using that strategy, which really, like you said, there were so many other issues where I think it should have been one of them, but I don't think it should have been quite as focal of a
Right.
campaign point as
Right.
it had been. So I completely understand that. I wanted to circle back to what you mentioned with like people not understanding like the difference between abortion and like reproductive rights.
Yeah.
Because that was actually one of the things I had talked about in the article as well was about when you are talking to other people with um different political ideologies. Like
Yeah.
again, you if someone's just there to argue with you, like don't waste your time. If
Right.
they're just there to scream in your face and say that you're wrong, they're
Yep.
not willing to have that conversation. That's not going to be like beneficial to either of you. But if there is someone that's
Absolutely.
just disagrees with you and you can have a conversation with them, you can, inform them about things that might not be as knowledgeable on. You probably aren't going to succeed in changing their opinion, but you can at
Right.
least chip away at some of the misinformation or just the lack of knowledge that exists out there. And then the other thing, specifically with reframing the narrative, is that when you're approaching those conversations, you want to think about it from their perspective of what political points matter to them. So that's something that I do a lot where if I'm talking to like conservative audiences about mental health issues, I'm going to talk about, PTSD among veterans or like mental health for first responders, particularly like police officers. Like law enforcement has a very high suicide rate. Talk about that, that's going to get them to like care a lot more about the issue. And
That's
once you have
smart.
that foot in the door, then that can actually lead to a conversation. And when you have a when you're able to start with a conversation, then you can actually talk about political discourse and get into the nitty gritty of like what can we do to solve these issues. It's again about kind of trying to overcome those divides instead of just making it about the issues themselves, caring about the people and trying to understand how you can best relate to them and converse with them.
Yeah, no, that's really smart because when we're just going back and forth with each other, we're just doing it to express our emotion, right? Like in the moment, we're emotional about this topic and we're just doing it to get that emotion out. But if you really want to have a successful conversation and really get your point across, cater to the things that matter to that person, that's absolutely perfect. But yeah, that just kind of it caters to reframing the narrative, if and it really is valid on a lot of conversational fronts because the point you made that sometimes people just want to scream in your face. Sometimes people just want to, I believe what I believe. And some people aren't open to effectively communicating because their goal is not to have a conversation. Their goal is to get their point across. I have a friend who's kind of like that, and he sends me stuff all the time on, in messages, and they're kind of disproving my point. And I'll look at them. Sometimes I won't respond. Sometimes I will, and I'll just kind of give my opinion and not like a, well, blah, 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 like, hey, this is what I think about this video kind of thing. And then a lot of times they won't respond to that, to what I have to say. And I think maybe part of it's because I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm not trying to defend, it's just, hey, I think this is what I think about this video, like a sentence or two. And objectively, I'm not trying to get you to believe what I believe because I know we believe certain, different things. Um, so sometimes you just have to reframe the narrative and sometimes just walk away from the conversation. Sometimes that's the way to reframe the narrative because now they're not accomplishing their goal and they're not doing it. They're not having the conversation in the way they were having, intended to have the conversation. And two, like, don't let people change your narrative. Like if you believe what you believe from factual evidence, from life experience, this is you're allowed to have your opinion and your stance. If your stance is informed and on either side, you believe what you believe, and that's fine. Just don't mistreat people because of it. And don't let people mistreat you because of it. And, I see a lot of times people say, well, I'm not ruining friendships or familial relationships over politics. And we shouldn't, right? Like, there's people I don't really converse with anymore. And it's because of some of the opinions that I've seen them now, like, have the balls to openly say because as we know, a lot of people, the current president has kind of given them that confidence. So we can say these things now. And, I've got someone supporting my thought process so I can say it out loud. Um, but I don't feel like we should end relationships over politics. But sometimes it's acceptable to end relationships over people's actions and words and how they treat other people at the kind of guidance of people in political power.
Yeah, I think kind of adding on to that, there's a difference between politics and like someone's core beliefs.
Right.
So like you can I have friends that are conservative
Mhm.
And I'm also atheist, and I have a lot of friends who are like devoutly religious.
Right.
Like you can converse and be perfectly fine and be friends with or have family members that are very different beliefs than you,
Yeah.
either culturally or politically things. But if you are someone who believes in intolerance or believes that because of who I am, I don't deserve rights, that's not politics anymore. That's hating me as a person, and
Right.
there's not anything that I can do to change that
Yeah.
about you.
Absolutely. 100% absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, there's a difference. There's a big difference in political affiliation and our beliefs that other people shouldn't have certain rights because they're not us. It's a big difference. Like I said, like I can understand why some people are Republican. I can understand how their belief system aligns with that political party. I can understand that. Whether I believe or whether I agree with those beliefs or not, I can understand it, right? So it's all right, cool. That's what you believe. That's what you believe. It's just like you said, just like religion or you know any. I understand why you believe in this religion. I respect it. You know, just respect my decision to not practice it. Or, I have made the comment a couple of times that I do not consider myself a Christian. And there are certain people in my family who are like, what? So you don't believe in God? That's not what I said. Because, first of all, Christianity is not the only valid religion, right? So, technically, all religions have validity. They started from a root belief because of an experience someone had. So they all have validity. And I don't think it's fair to say this is the only true religion. That's a whole nother topic. There are aspects of the religion that I do practice. I pray. There's a church locally that I go to from time to time. I enjoy it. I enjoy being there. I'm super particular about where I go though. But like I'm not anti-religion. And then there's other people that I know that are like, all right, cool. One of my cousins, we're super close. And when I said that publicly, because it took me a while to say it publicly, like off the podcast, because I know like a lot of my family doesn't listen to my podcast. So, I was kind of like, it was kind of like I came out as not Christian, you know? And so my cousin was just like, cool. She is a Christian. She has a very strong belief system, but she is one of the only people in either side of my family that I know that is like non-judgmental on all fronts. Even with her belief system, she doesn't judge you because you don't believe her belief system. Like and so I really expected her response to be cool, but she even kind of like supported me on social media. And it was pretty cool. But then I also have, I have conversations with people. I have a degree in Christian studies. It's like I don't just not claim it to be cool. I'm like, this was a thought out decision, and I think it should be. Then, your spiritual walk, or another conversation too, because religion and spirituality do not have to be the same thing. But that's another, it's just one of those things. It's one of those things. Religion, just like politics, is one of those things that if you don't educate yourself, you can easily misjudge someone because you think they have a different reason for, taking whatever stance or not taking whatever stance that they have.
Yeah, no, and when I was writing writing the article, kind of opened up, I think one of the only things I mentioned specifically as far as just kind of painting the picture of the political state that we've been in was President Trump's speech to the UN in September,
Mhm.
when he was condemning the leaders from all of the other countries and saying that their countries are going to go to hell, and kind of insinuating that like the US and Christianity are like the only one true country, one
Right.
true religion. And like for someone, as someone who works pretty regularly with people internationally, and like considers myself a part of like the global community, that was just insane to me, frankly, um, because you know I've had some eye-opening experiences of working with people of vastly different cultures from other countries, where it's like, oh, that was kind of ignorant of me, and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
accepting that, acknowledging it, changing my behavior and moving on from that. Like,
Yep.
but keeping that open mind about the fact that people come from very different backgrounds, people come from completely different parts of the world, and it's really important to recognize that. And I think
Yeah.
particularly in the US, because we as a nation pride ourselves on being a country of immigrants, being the melting pot, having all of these different people and different cultures. And so, in order for us to be able to function cohesively as a country, we need to be open of the fact that people are going to have very different cultural backgrounds, ideological differences, different religions, belief systems, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
There's no reason why we still can't all work together. It just, like you said, it's a matter of respecting the fact that people have those differences, being willing to working with other people, not going in there with misconceptions or preconceived notions about the other side, just having that open mind and being like, okay, this is politics. We're not going to let that result in us having to fight each other on everything and hate each other. We can work together
Right.
to have a supportive, cohesive environment and country.
Yeah. That's one thing that always confuses me. It's like this country is kind of supposed to be a mix. So, like, how is it supposed to be one thing? Like, this country itself, it's supposed to be like, it's not a Christian nation, but so many people want it to be because that's their belief system. But this country in particular, like, maybe some people are not in the right place if this is where you are or want to be, but you want things to be one way. That's literally the opposite of the point of here. Like it's always so confusing to me. And the country was founded, correct me if I'm wrong, but part of the foundation of the country was to keep religion and politics separate. So it kind of caught me off guard when our president took this Christian stance, and a lot of the chatter was that, well, he's never taken this stance before, and now all of a sudden, this is his hard stance when they're supposed to be kept separate. So that shouldn't have even been a part of your, like a part of your political stance at all, you know? Um, so, so yeah, that threw me off. I was like, but I don't know. The politics is it's such a complex thing because we have a clear guide of the way things are supposed to be, right? But then people are allowed to take positions of power and still kind of manipulate it, as long as it looks like the outline of what it's supposed to be. Um, and I think as long as you are taking a stance that enough people agree with, you can kind of tweak it a little bit to make it appropriate, I guess, even though it's not.
Yeah, no, the dichotomy, I guess, of preaching religion, or specifically preaching Christianity as like the singular religion for the US when we were founded on, the principle of like literally when the colonies were all founded originally because they were seeking out religious freedom from England,
Right,
like, and yeah, no, the separation of church and state was one of the like that wasn't written into like or no, it is because there's also like freedom of religion
right.
and
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah. But
yeah,
like the word separation of church and state aren't like written in anywhere in like any specific document, but like the idea of it is,
yeah.
that's also been like a core principle. And then you are also having people that are preaching Christianity but not practicing it with a lot of the policies that
Hmm.
they're implementing. So it's
Yeah,
just it's a very interesting time that we are in for sure.
yeah. Yeah, it is, but it's important. On the mental health not spectrum, I guess, it's very important to not let it overtake who you are as a person and how you interact with other people. We get very caught up between social media and real life, and sometimes we forget that the interactions we have on social media are driven and fueled by interaction. And in life, you don't have to have these conversations with people. If there are people who will stress you out with their belief system, just don't talk about it. It's not like social media, it's not right there in your face. And if it is, maybe try to avoid certain conversations with those people or say, hey, I prefer not to have this conversation because that's okay too. Um, I have a I have a family member who we have very, very different belief systems. But I wouldn't have these conversations with them because I know that they cannot effectively have that conversation. There's other people I have different stances with, and we have effective conversations. And they still believe what they believe. I still believe what I believe. But it's if you can't have an effective conversation with that person, don't have the conversation, and just avoid that clash altogether, and keep your blood pressure at a nice cohesive level.
Yeah, knowing when to step away, both from direct conversations that you're having people what are online and in person, but also like when to unplug from social media.
Yeah.
Like that's all like so important because again,
Mhm.
we're not meant to be consuming dark, depressing news like that in that medium like
Yeah.
all the time. And then, being mindful of the settings with your algorithms and all of that. And I kind of the last of like the 10 recommendations I had in my article, the last one was about, prioritizing yourself.
Yes.
Because I felt like that was really important to end on because
Mhm.
that's something that I think everyone forgets too much
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
self-care and how important that is.
Yeah.
And when you get caught up in all of the state of politics that we're in, or just politics in general, it's really depressing and it has this negative effect on people's mental health, which we don't stop to recognize. So it's so important to know when to disconnect from that, to take
Absolutely.
those breaks, to be mindful, um, and to just make sure that you're doing okay. Because if we want things to be better, you can't help other people if you don't help yourself first.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's kind of that's a as a mom, that's something I had to very much learn. But it's, even if you don't have kids, it's important too, because you have people in your life that, even if you don't care for people, you have people in your life that you care about who need your support. You need support from them. You whether you're a caregiver or not, taking care of yourself still applies, because you can't take care of anyone else or be a support system to anyone else if you're consistently struggling yourself. So, um, well, I have to get to another meeting, but if you haven't read Taylor's article, um, it will be the link will be in the description of this episode. And so check that out, for sure. Read it for yourself, bookmark it, go back and read it. When you're feeling stressed out about a conversation, go back and look over those tips. When you feel like someone is having a conversation that is, on this topic, that, or an opinion that you're like, this is stressing me out, refer to the article. It has really helpful tips. And, just remember, if it's not good for your mental health, if it's not good for your brain, it's not good for your body, right? If something in interaction with someone stresses you out, or an interaction with something, the internet, if it stresses you out, take a break from it. Take a break from the person, take a break from the internet, take a break, put your health first, because your mental health is part of your overall health. And, it's like catering to other people. If you're not healthy, you can't be, helpful to other people. If your brain is not healthy, it can't cater to the rest of your body. So thank you so much for being here with us. And this was such a wonderful topic. And I'm glad to have you to discuss it with, and we'll see you next month.
Check us out on YouTube at Rhea Higgs, ReahHagues. You can also keep up with us on Instagram at Just the Who Podcast.